Hello and welcome CTS266 Section 840 students for the spring 2016 semester at Anne Arundel Community College. This is the Cisco Networking Academy CCNP Switch course, and this evening's video tutorial is going to be on Challenge Activity 1, another fantastic activity here from Cisco Learning Labs, where we're going to be taking a look at some network discovery tasks. And as you can see here, we've got the scenario. Dwayne has given us our first task. We do not know what is over here by the question mark, and we're going to go ahead and figure that out. Let's take a look at our job aids really quick here, and let's see what we've got. And there are the job aids there. So we're the PC. As you can see, the switches are going to be switch 1, 10, 20, DLS1 is, or DSW1, distribution switch 1 and 2 will be 30 and 40. And then we have a router. So let's go ahead. Let's just jump onto PC1. The telnet and enable passwords are set. So we're on PC1 here. Let's go from user exec into privilege exec, and Cisco is our password. I apologize, I've got the text as large as I can get it there in that window. In fact, let me see if I can, if this might help a little bit. There we go. Makes it a little larger there. Okay, good. All right, so as you can see, we're looking at PC1. So let's telnet to the first switch, 192.168.0.10, and password is going to be Cisco. So we are now on switch 1, and what we want to do on switch 1 is take a look at all of the connectivity that happens to be on switch 1. So let's transition from user exec to privilege exec. Cisco again is the password, and I'm going to say show IP interface brief. As you can see, we've got quite a few interfaces here, and a number of the interfaces are in the up mode. It looks like we're using VLAN 1 is the switch virtual interface there. For VLAN 1 is the IP that we telnetted to. So let's go ahead and do a show CDP neighbor and a show CDP, and let's pull that back real quick, and a show CDP neighbor detail. So you can see the show CDP neighbor detail gives us much more information than simply the show CDP neighbor. So what do we have here? Well, we've got, and let me go ahead and transition here to the drawing device. Let's change the color from black. We'll use some yellow here. So you can see we did the show CDP neighbor detail, and we get much more information. Specifically, we learn about the IP addresses of the neighboring devices. And then the show CDP neighbor detail simply gives us some basic information. It gives us the device ID, specifically the host name for those devices. And take a look at our capabilities here. We've got IGMP if we were doing multicast. We've got switching capabilities at layer 2 as well as router capabilities. So these are multi-layer, and that's why they're in the distribution layer, or the distribution block, if you will. So Ethernet 03 is DSW1, and Ethernet 11 is DSW2. So we've just found out we've got two neighbors here, so let's clear the screen. They show as switches. What if I were to say show spanning tree, right? So, and this is a command that you definitely want to become familiar with, not only with the running of the command, but with the output that we see in the command here. And let's see here. So we are the root bridge. So this switch, switch 1, happens to be the root bridge. And you can tell that right here under the root ID where it says this bridge is the root, which means it looks like it's got a default priority. So this has the lowest MAC address. And so here is the MAC address of this switch. So this switch is the root bridge. Okay, so let's go into global config. We're going to go to interface Ethernet 03, and let's put a quick description in here. We're going to say uplink, and we'll bring this back here, uplink to DSW, I believe it was 1. And what I typically do in the production environments that I work in is I always like to put in my initials so that if somebody were to come take a look at this later, they would be able to easily discern, okay, well, who made the entry, and then on what date was the entry made, and I always drop in a CCR number, if there's one associated with it, a change control request, and we'll just say that it's going to be 9999, right? So if somebody were to do a do show run on interface Ethernet 03, that is what they would see, and you would immediately know that this is very well documented. You would know that you would come talk to me if you were curious about, hey, wait a second, what is Ethernet 03 doing? Because you see my initials are here, you know the day that the work was done, and you can reference the change control request. So again, I always try to work in as much information as I can without getting too carried away, so that someone following after me can easily come in and see who did it, when did they do it, and why did they do it, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and clear our screen here. So that takes care of the first port, and I think it was Ethernet 1, was it 01 or 11? Let's go back and take a look here. I think it was 11. Yeah, Ethernet 11 is DSW2. So we're going to go into interface Ethernet 11, and I can actually pull my description back, and we'll leave it the same and simply change DSW2 as the description there. So if I were to say do show run interface Ethernet 11, you can see we've got our comment there, and so Ethernet 03 will carry that comment there with it. All right, so that takes care of the switch 1 descriptions, at least from the show CDP. So let's go ahead and end and do a write mem and save our configuration. And let me exit out here. Let's move on to the next switch, which is going to be 192.168.0.20. All right, so here we are on switch 2. So we'll go from user exec to privilege exec, and let's go ahead and fire right out with the show CDP neighbors, right? And it looks like switch 2 is also dual connected here. And what about a show CDP neighbor detail? Again, we see the same information about the two distribution layer switches. All right, so let's go ahead and let me pull up that one again. We'll go into global config. I'm going to go into interface Ethernet 11, and we're going to use our description command again, and I'm just going to simply say uplink to DSW1 TP bond fee 01132016 CCR number, and we'll say we did this under a different CCR. All right, and so that takes care of that uplink there. So now let's go ahead and jump into Ethernet, 1.2 there. And again, we can simply call back, or recall, I should say, the previous description, because we're going to reuse that. And so that takes care of the previous, or I'm sorry, of the two links that we have here on switch 2. And again, if I do a show run interface Ethernet 11 or a show run interface Ethernet 12, you can see that that is the information we have in there identifying those links. Show IP interface brief, and there we go. So that's it. It looks like that's everything. Okay, so we've got two connections. In fact, I would assume if I were to take a look, I don't think the job aids has a diagram in here. No diagram, but you can kind of see how things are shaking out here. And what I'll do is I'm going to draw the topology over here when we're done, because we've got the links to do it. We would just need to draw it. All right, so let's get off of switch 2, and now let's go to one of the distribution layer switches, and I believe this is going to be 1. And it is. All right. So we'll go from user exec to privilege exec. Let's see how many interfaces we've got here. Again, number of interfaces here, and now it looks like we've got our uplink. Possibly that interface is going to go to the router. So let's say show CDP neighbors. Now, a quick note as we're going through this. CDP is a great tool, as you can see, to maybe troubleshoot or to go through and use it for exactly what the lab is, or the discovery activity, the challenge activity is calling for, and that's as a discovery utility. And as you can see, we get tons of information, and as soon as I put the detail down, I get information about everything we're plugged into. I find out iOS versions, I find out VTP versions, I find the management addresses out, and so for this reason, CDP in most serious production environments is probably going to be disabled. And you can turn it off globally, or you can turn it off on a per interface basis. And so just keep that in mind, that along with the ease of gathering all this information comes a little risk. And that risk is that if someone were to gain unauthorized access, they could quickly map your network out. As you can see here, is we're mapping this network out right now. Okay, so we've got what, 3 devices hooked up here. We've got the 2 switches and the routers. Let's get into global config. We'll start out with interface Ethernet. Ethernet 03. And we're basically going to say description, and this is my uplink to switch 1 TP bond fee and 01132016 and CCR number, and we'll just do 3333. All right, so that takes care of that. Let's go into Ethernet 01, and that is going to be my uplink to switch 2. And this is typically something that you don't go back and do after the fact. This is typically an activity that while you're building the environment out, you want to make sure that this information gets put in there. Now, if you come into an environment that is, somebody's been, maybe the previous administrator has moved on, he's resigned, whatever the case may be, this is definitely something that you want to walk through and make sure that you've got good information in these descriptions, because this can save you a ton of time when it comes to troubleshooting. So we'll finally go into Ethernet 02, and this is an uplink to, and what are we going to call this? This is just router 1. All right, so do show run interface Ethernet 03 and Ethernet, what was it, 01 and 02, I believe. And there you go. And so we've got our comments in there, and you can see that, again, if somebody were to follow you, or you're out sick, they'd be able to easily take a look at this and see what it is you've done. Again, this is a nice, easy challenge activity to kind of, sort of bring you into the fold and get you into the habit of being able to sort of ferret around and figure out how things are set up. So let's exit out, and now we're going to go to the multi-layer switch 2. We'll go from user exec to privilege exec, and then we'll go into, what are we going to say, show CDP neighbor. So again, as you can see, we've got show IP interface brief. Let me see if it's that same 20.1. All right, so show CDP neighbor. All right, so let's go into global config, where we're going to say interface. Let's do Ethernet 01, and the description is going to be uplink to switch 1, and we'll put our comments in here, 01132016, and CCR number, and we'll just say 2222. All right, we'll go into interface Ethernet 03, and let's pull our description back here. And this is our uplink to switch 2. And then finally, Ethernet 02, and this is my uplink to router 1. And it may seem kind of silly what we're doing right now, right? We're kind of going through, we're labeling things, but let me just go ahead and tell you that the time invested in doing this initially and making sure that you've got accurate information in your port descriptions can save you literally hours of time on the back end if for whatever reason you came into an environment or you had to troubleshoot something that was completely undocumented. And that is not a fun situation to be in. All right, so now we're on the router, so we'll go from user exec to privilege exec, and same thing on the router, show CDP neighbors. You can see I've got 2 interfaces connected up here, Ethernet 01 and 02. and those go to the distribution layer switches. And so let's go ahead and get our comments in there really quick. So we'll go to global config, interface Ethernet 01, and we're going to say description, whoops, uplink to DSW1, whoops, TP bond fee 01132016, CCR number 1111, and then interface Ethernet 02. And again, we'll just reuse this here. Uplink to DSW or DSW2, and on the router, if I say do show IP interface brief, you can see that we have an internet connection. It looks like out Ethernet 03. So let's do a do show run interface Ethernet 03. And as you can see, they've got a description in there, so we know that that is our connection out to the internet. All right. So the next thing it's asking us to do, and let me save this off here, is from the PC's perspective. And remember, this isn't actually a PC, right? This is actually Cisco IOU. So if I were to say show IP interface brief, you can see it's going to behave as if it's a router. Show spanning tree, so there's no spanning tree existing on the PC. What about, let's see, show interface Ethernet 00. So here's the Ethernet interface. You can see that the burned-in MAC address, whoops, the MAC that we have here for the PC ends in 0200. So AABBCC00 and then 0200. We can see that our IP is 101. Right? So let's go ahead and investigate the MAC address on switch 1. And as it appears again, let me see if show CDP Neighbors gives me information. So see, CDP is not enabled. So show IP or show, let's see, show run in Ethernet 00. What do we have there? All right, no IP route cache, and we've got our IP address. Show run includes CDP. There we go. So, and this is what I was commenting on earlier. It is a very, very good thing to disable CDP. Now, that is in the global config. So if I were to go from privilege exec into global config with a configure terminal, I could say no CDP, and you can see no CDP run, and hit enter. Now, that disables CDP globally on a switch. If I were to go into the specific interface, I could say interface Ethernet 00, and I would say no enable, I believe, or no CDP enable, sorry, no CDP enable, there it is. So I would say no CDP enable. So if I wanted it to be running on the switch, but I just wanted to pick off specific interfaces to disable it on, I would go to the interface and say no CDP enable. If I wanted to disable it on every single interface on the switch or on your router, you would go into global config and say no CDP run, right? So now I've put it on both, but it's not going to run in any event. So if I were to say do show run interface Ethernet 00, you can see that now it just simply says no CDP enable. All right, so let's jump onto the switch here. Let me end out of there, and we're going to say telnet 192.168.0.10, and Cisco is our password. So on switch 1, we want to investigate the MAC address table. So show MAC address table. And as you can see here, remember, this is IOU, so we have no static entries here. We're looking simply at dynamic entries. And our MAC ends in 0200. So there we are right there. And it actually shows us coming in on Ethernet 01. And so Ethernet 01 is the port that we're coming in on. You can see we have multiple entries here on Ethernet 11. And so what is that an indication of? Exactly. That we could be connected to another switch. So whatever's out Ethernet 11, if I say show CDP Neighbors, what is out Ethernet 11? Exactly, it's DSW2. And so I'm actually going to draw this entire network here off to the right after we go into global config, Ethernet 01, and we'll say description is uplink for PC1 TP bond fee 01132016, and CCR, maybe this is the day that we plugged in, or the CCR under which we connected this PC to our infrastructure. And so that is pretty much going to do it. Let's go ahead and say end and write mem. All right, so based off of what we know right now from the show CDP neighbor, and I will definitely change this to black. So what we have right now is we know that we have switch 1, and we know that we have, I believe, was there a switch 2 or is it just switch 1? Yeah, there was a switch 2. And we have switch 2. So we just learned that PC1, which is Ethernet, what was it, 00, I believe, Ethernet 00, and that connects to switch 1 on Ethernet 01. So now switch 1 and switch 2 weren't connected. We had DSW1, and then we had DSW2, which is slightly larger than DSW1. So this is not to scale. Definitely not being drawn to scale here. So that link was, for both of these guys, was Ethernet 03. And then there was a connection here, which for both, well, actually not for both of those guys. Yeah, so that was 1-1 right there. Then we had a connection. Let me change the colors here for these guys. So from switch 2 to this direction, this was 03, and that was 1-2. And again, this is all information that we picked up by looking, and that was 01, at the output, and then we had a router here. This was all learned by simply looking at CDP, right? And this was router 1. And so router 1 had connections to both DSW or DSW1 and 2, and so this was Ethernet 01, this was 02, and then we had 02 and 02, and then finally the connection out to the internet was Ethernet 03. And again, this is the danger of CDP, and I apologize. I changed the color here just to show switch 1 and switch 2 were different, but then kind of dropped off changing the color. But again, this is kind of the danger or the flip side of that show CDP capability, is that somebody who gets access to your network can literally map out your entire infrastructure. All right, well, this is going to wrap up the first challenge activity for the semester, challenge activity 1, where we had to use show CDP neighbor to work our way through the infrastructure, to come up with a drawing of what the infrastructure looked like without actually seeing the physical equipment and the physical cable connections that run between the equipment. And again, very easy to do. We saw how you can turn CDP off, and we also took another look at the MAC address table. Specifically, we were looking for the MAC that corresponded to the PC so we could figure out which port that was plugged into. All right, well, this wraps up challenge number 1, and I will see you all on Monday evening.